Hello, everybody. We are now up to Forum 11. Our topic is Zionism, and hopefully, this will be available to you on April 3rd. I will tell you it is the third attempt I've made. Apparently, the compatibility issues between the Mac that I use and the PC system of Gratz is questionable, and I apologize. I do hope this will be up in time. It originally was made actually a week ahead of time, but there's still issues to be resolved. I'm using a different system now that one of my kids told me about, and I'm hopeful that things will be flowing more smoothly. For those of you celebrating Passover, I hope it's been very pleasant. For those coming up on Easter, because as this is being taped before Easter, I wish you a very pleasant holiday with your families. For all of us who are celebrating springtime, I hope indeed it is springtime and we're done with the snow. So with that in mind, I want to launch into our discussion this week, and it is indeed yet another very significant discussion about modern Jewish history with a focus on West Europe prior to the Holocaust. This week we take up the question of Zionism. Zionism has transformed the Jewish world profoundly. Just as the Holocaust essentially decimated the European predominance in Jewish life, the European center of Jewish life, so the Zionist movement has rebuilt a Jewish center in the land of Israel, referred to in Hebrew as Eretz Yisrael, and in so doing has transformed the diaspora as well. Within the few last years, demographers believe that Israel is now the largest Jewish community in the world, edging out even the United States. Zionism brought hundreds of thousands of Jews back to the land of Israel, has sustained the state, defended the state, and revived the Hebrew language, which today is spoken by at least 8 million people, including many non-Jews. I guess one of the ironies of this story is that among the Israeli Arabs, there is now even a Hebrew language literature, including some novels of distinction. So Zionism has been transformative. It was in large part a reaction to the anti-Semitism which was building from the end of the 19th century, culminating in the Holocaust. Zionism, in its, let's say, classical phase, maintained a belief in what's called Shlilat Hagolah, the destruction of the diaspora, that Jewish life outside of the Jewish center, particularly in the land of Israel, would not be viable in modern times, which sadly, in part, has actually proven true. And I say sadly only because at such a high expense. Now, the deep root of Zionism in the Jewish experience is, of course, scriptural, going back to God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 12, that there would be a covenant between God and Abraham, and that the deal would be sealed with the awarding of the land of Canaan, later the land of Israel, to Abraham and his descendants. There has never been perfect agreement on exactly what the borders of that promised land would be, and as we know, it remains highly contentious to this day. In the year 721 BCE, the northern kingdom of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians, and those people were removed by the Assyrians, became known as the lost tribe of Israel, and a hope developed that one day they would be restored. Restorationism being a name for this deep root of Zionism. And they never were restored, and the legends of the lost tribes continue to abound in many places, Brazil, Afghanistan, etc. In 586 BCE, the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed by the waters of Babylon. There we sat down and wept. And again, there was a longing to go back to the land of Israel, but this time it succeeded. And after a brief duration, from 586 to 535 BCE, the Jews' fortunes were restored, and the Persians allowed the Jews to go back to Jerusalem and Judea. And they dwelt there for the next 6 centuries, now also having outside diaspora communities, until Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70, and the temple was destroyed. Although the temple was destroyed and Jerusalem was destroyed, it's important to note that the Jewish presence never departed from the land of Israel, that some Jews always remained on Eretz Yisrael throughout this period, that it was not Judenrein, free of Jews in any way. And in some periods during the long centuries of statelessness, there were considerable Jewish communities in the land of Israel. Modern Zionism draws on all of this, but it is also particularly modern. Some people refer to it as the secular messianism of the Jewish people. Following emancipation in Europe, with its demand, as we saw with Napoleon, that the price of emancipation would be that the Jews reject all national aspects of their communal life and no longer express a desire to go back to the land of their fathers, but to view themselves as Jewish religionists who are French citizens, Germans who are Germans by politics and Jews by religion, etc., that they renounce their national identity. That was the terms of emancipation. And many Jews, as we saw, were most hopeful that that would work. Others believed that it couldn't work, and that the Jews could not be absorbed into society in Europe as Jews, leading to this phenomena which has caught the attention of our class in a very profound way, of self-hatred, that they simply didn't fit. And not fitting, as we all recall from our junior high school days, can be very painful. Technical term being alienation, and that sometimes the only remedy for that is conversion. But very often, even with conversion, the neuroses of alienation and marginalization remains. The situation takes a very bad turn during the last quarter of the 19th century, with a resurgence of anti-Semitism, sweeping anti-Semitism, from Russia across Europe, Germany, France, the UK, to the United States, a very strong expression of anti-Semitism, fueled by many different concerns. Some a new European nationalism, which saw the Jews as an unassimilable other folk, a racism that now viewed humanity in terms of multiple races, of which the Jews were one, and understood to be particularly nefarious, even evil, in its genetic makeup. A revival, manipulation of old Christian prejudices, and government conspiracy, particularly in Russia, France, and other places, in which the Jews were identified in their traditional role of scapegoat. This came together in a powerful way during the first Dreyfus trial in France in the 1890s, witnessed by one Theodore Herzl, an assimilated Jew from Budapest, who was quite talented and energetic. He was writing for one of the great newspapers of Europe at the time in Vienna. He came to the conclusion that the answer to the Jewish question was that the Jews, in fact, were a nation, and that they did not fit in Europe, and that everybody would be well served by the departure of Jews from Europe. Now, Herzl then dedicates himself to creating a world Zionist movement. And his idea was to go to the Kaiser, to go to the Tsar, to go to the royalty in England, and from top down create a Jewish state. And the deal was, you don't want us, we don't want to be with you, give us a place, and everybody will be a lot more happy. Herzl himself was not connected to the land of Israel, although he did travel there. He was outvoted, and the territorial question was settled, mostly with student support, by focusing the Zionist movement on the land of Israel because of the historical connection all the way back to Abraham, according to the text of the Torah. So his method was known as political Zionism, and he was the overall guide, even the Moses, as many of the pictures make him out to be, of the modern Zionist movement. There were other forms of Zionism. In particular, there were different forms of practical Zionism, which means bottom up, go to Israel, build it up, and then a state will evolve. Leading the pack here were the socialists, who created the kibbutz movement and other labor-based institutions. It was a secular, socialist, Zionist viewpoint, very often bucolic in the sense that they believed, quote, that we will rebuild the land and the land will rebuild us. Another variant on that was the revisionists, who believed that of necessity Jews needed to concentrate on self-defense. They're led by a man by the name of Jabotinsky in Poland, who creates the Betar movement. And today, actually, in fact, many years ago, about almost 30 years ago, the dominant force in Israeli politics shifted from the socialist labor left to the followers of Jabotinsky on the right. It was Herut and then Likud, and now there's all types of parties constituting a majority in Israel. I would call it the right of center secular middle class today in Israel is dominant following these early ideological battles. There was also a cultural Zionist movement that was headed by one Achat Ha'am, an essayist in the very modern Jewish community of Odessa on the Black Sea, Odessa being kind of a prototype for Tel Aviv. That is a modern non-religious community on the sea in which Zionism and Hebrew reading was active. Eventually, the question of language was resolved. Herzl and others foresaw German as being the language of the Jewish people because of its close association with culture and with science. But again, Hebrew would win the day in this regard with the founding of the Technion, the MIT of Israel after World War I. Cultural Zionists argued that the problem wasn't anti-Semitism, but the problem that the Jews needed to fix was Judaism, that they needed a healthy culture in order to build a healthy people. So they proceed along those lines. And I would say it had a dramatic effect, not only in Israel and in the Zionist movement, but here in America as well. Cultural Zionism became very much part of Reconstructionism, conservative Judaism, and transformed Reform Judaism from anti-Zionist to a Zionist outlook, fitting most neatly under the rubric of cultural Zionism. And finally, there's the very complex question of religious Zionism. Understand that whether one was ultra-Orthodox Haredi or a reformer, for different reasons, most in those groups early on rejected Zionism as being incompatible with their religious philosophy. Ultra-Orthodox because Zionism showed a lack of faith in the coming of the Messiah, Biat HaMashiach, and for the reformers who agreed with the program of denationalization in Europe and in America, that it raised the question of dual loyalties and the renationalization of the Jewish people. In time, all the major streams came to recognize Zionism. And today, it's only the fringe element, in my opinion, in ultra-Orthodoxy that remains virulently anti-Zionist, Natuye Karta and other groups, to the point where they actually associate themselves with the Palestine Authority, with the Iranian government, and have taken an extreme anti-Zionist position, which speaking from my own point of view, is indeed shameful and really treasonous from the broader historical perspective. So Zionism is launched in the context of anti-Semitism, the Dreyfus Affair, the pogroms in Russia, the activation of anti-Semitism in France, England trying to block immigration to England, all types of restrictions in the United States. It seemed that the Jewish situation heading into World War I was becoming increasingly problematic and increasingly dangerous for Jews all over the world. One response to this, and I would say clearly the most important response going into the middle decades of the 20th century, was the Zionist movement, which transformed Jewish identity from cultural, religious, ethnic into national. In Zionism, to say one is a Jew is to make a political statement the same way one would say I am an American or I am a Frenchman. And it has been quite a remarkable ride. The conditions on the ground were, again, radically transformed by the outcome of World War I, and that will be our discussion for the following week. So I hope you enjoy the readings. And that this summary talk will help place things in perspective, and I will be seeing all of you online. Take care.